I'm Shadoe Stevens at American Top 40. A listener wants to know, how many artists have had the number one single of the year on American Top 40 more than once? Well, there have been 4. One in the 50s, one in the 60s, one in the 70s, and one in the 80s. Details coming up.
The shadow counts them down. American Top 40!
And now we're up to that question about number one singles of the year. A listener in Colo, Iowa named James Chitty wants to know how many artists have had the number one single of the year on American Top 40 more than once. Well, there have been 4 artists who've done that. One in the 50s, one in the 60s, one in the 70s, and one here in those ever-lovable 80s. Let's start with the artist from the 50s. In 1956, he had the number one single of the year, Heartbreak Hotel. And then a year later, he scored the number one single of 1957 with All Shook Up. The man, the myth, the legend. He's everywhere. Elvis Presley. Now, in the 60s, the act that scored the number one single of the year more than once first did it in 1964. That was with the song they first hit with here in America, I Want to Hold Your Hand. In 1968, they scored their second number one single of the year in the USA with the song Hey Jude. The Beatles, of course. Next, we fast forward to 1977. That's when a 19-year-old singer from Australia scored the number one hit of the year, I Just Want to Be Your Everything, and then followed that up a year later with the number one single of 1978, Shadow Dancing, the late Andy Gibb. And that brings us to the 80s. One singer in this decade has sung on 2 different number one songs of the year. In 1985, he sang the number one single of the year, Careless Whisper, as part of the duo Wham! And then just last year as a solo star, he repeated that feat, scoring the number one single of 1988, Faith. The British heartthrob who doesn't go for a close shave, George Michael, yes. And those are the artists who've had the number one single of the year more than once. Elvis Presley in the 50s, the Beatles in the 60s, Andy Gibb in the 70s, and George Michael in the 80s. Thanks for that letter. Now back to the countdown.
The hit from coast to coast.